Welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
Daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. I think President Obama was listening because I'm like, oh, hey, where's the you standing behind Biden going, this is a BFD? Well, yesterday he tweeted that out. It's a BFD. And it is. Signing the Inflation Reduction Act, big deal. Seriously, I can't emphasize enough how big of a deal this actually is, that we're going to do something. Going to do something on the climate. Finally, after 50 years of inaction, 50 years of gridlock, something's going to... Is it enough? No, not enough. So don't get all crazy. No, it's not nearly... No, it's not enough. But it's moving us in the right direction. And yes, there are concessions. That is what our system brings us. Not happy with it? Elections have consequences. Go get us some more people who think that the climate is the most important issue and we need to deal with it. That simple. But, yep, good on Joe Biden, good on the Democrats for moving this along. Now, got tons of email from folks. It's not going to reduce the deficit tomorrow. No, it's not. It was never going to do that. Over time, it will. And I've had a bunch of people going, well, it's the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, over time, it's going to, because it's going to bring down the cost of healthcare. It's going to bring down the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. Even going to bring down some energy costs. That's going to help. Energy costs being a huge driver of our inflation problems right now. And I know, Joe Biden did that. I know. Save it. But big deal. We're going to talk about that today. Got a lot on the plate today. But yesterday, the results, predictable. Liz Cheney got thumped, as was predicted. And Trump-backed Harriet Hagman is her name. She won with 2/3 of the vote, 66.3 to 28.9, a 37-point margin. That is a serious thumping, especially for an incumbent. Wow. And in true Trumpian fashion, the real class act that Harriet Hagman evidently is, she snubbed Liz Cheney's concession call. And Liz Cheney said, I left a message. I left a message, tried calling multiple times, tried to get in touch with her. Ignored. Evidently, Liz Cheney says that the woman hasn't gotten back to her, and I don't expect it. This is Trump world. This is what we expect from them now. Reports are already, Liz Cheney's already putting together a presidential run, which okay, you knock yourself out. I know a lot of people are enamored by her and her courage, in this moment, and I give her credit. I have always given her credit for, in this moment, standing up for democracy, standing up for the rule of law, standing up for our Constitution, all of that stuff. I've always given her credit on that sliver. That's it. On every other front, Liz Cheney's a monster. So please don't rewrite history. She gets credit for doing the right thing in this moment. But remember, she was all on board. She was all she was in line. But to her credit, she did stand up in the moment when it mattered. And I do give her credit for this. Now she, I guess, has raised, what was it, something like $15 million for her House race, which she got seriously thumped. And look, everyone knew that was going to happen because the Republican Party is a death cult. It's what this has turned into. And sadly, what we saw, in Wyoming is just that. They're the party of Trump now. There is nothing left of the grand old party other than the logo. There's nothing left of the party of Lincoln. There's nothing left of the party of Eisenhower. Certainly not. And even the party of Reagan. No, not there. This is now fully the party of Trump. And they've been going this way for a while. They've wanted an authoritarian strongman. This is where they've been going. Now, it's interesting again, what I find kind of weird is there's a move to kind of get rid of Trump because he's too much of a lightning rod, causes too much trouble, causes too much, other people going, no, this is bad. Because the true believer crowd, one of the polls I saw recently put the absolute, the fives, the absolute, they drank not just, the cup of Kool-Aid, but the whole pitcher. And they somehow figured out how to get it into the bloodstream. They introduced it into the bloodstream, put light, into the body, so to speak. They're only about 20% of the population, which is an enormous amount. But they can be outvoted, and that has to happen because what the Republican Party is right now is an authoritarian nationalist cult. Because if you truly were a conservative, if you really bought that line, which I doubt most people today know what true conservatism is anymore, Liz Cheney would have been the person you would have voted for on that side of the aisle. Because she checked off all of the conservative boxes. She did. I mean, honestly, all of the horrible policies she was on board with, all of the bad tax stuff, all of the bad anti-worker stuff, she's there. Policy-wise, if you're a conservative, she is in 100% in the crazy corner. But because she had the audacity, the unmitigated gall to speak out against the Donald and see what happened on January 6th as the abomination that it was, well, she's got to go. Got to go. You could be right on everything else. And this is the problem with cults. This is the problem. You've got to be 100% on board or you're out. You got to be 100% in the circle of trust, or like Robert De Niro in that stupid movie, you're out. That's simple. And she's out. And boy, did she get out. Now, in her concession speech, she did talk about the fact that there are candidates for Secretary of State across the country who refuse to report the actual results of the popular vote in future elections. This is a problem. She said no American should support election deniers for any position of genuine responsibility where their refusal to follow the rule of law will corrupt our future. Now, I agree with her on that. Absolutely. We found common ground. This is where I believe we can find some common ground. And as big of a monster as I think Liz Cheney is, the spawn of the devil, if you will, there are things that we agree on. She says that she finished up by saying that she's concerned with election deniers are marching towards power in key 2024 battlegrounds. And my state of Pennsylvania, we got a guy running for governor who I truly believe, if he's elected governor, doesn't matter who the people of Pennsylvania vote for. They will figure out how to get the right person. The one that they want. So, yeah, I'm curious how this is going to play out going forward, how Democrats have made kind of a gamble in backing some crazy candidates. Going to be interesting to see how this goes. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Did want to chime in with a couple of emails that I got that I wanted to address because I'm not quite sure how to take this. But Emma sent me an email. She wrote, I've been watching you for years on YouTube and loved the show. Recently, you look tired and sad. I hope everything's okay. You've given hope and inspiration to so many of us during the dark times of the Trump years. I'd hate to see anything happen to you. Wishing you the best. Emma. Emma, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I would have let it go if it was just Emma. But Janet also wrote, hey, Rick, everything all right with you? You look down. During the Trump years, you kept me going, giving me hope that everything was going to be okay. And things are looking up. Chin up. Keep up the good fight. Hope everything's okay. Everything's fine. I'm doing fine. Little drawn down, though. When you're dealing with destroyers and people who want to rip things apart and tear things down, it's a little taxing. And I'm in a moment right now where I see opportunity, I see hope, because I do this program. Started this program because I'm an activist. I'm someone who wants to make lives better. As a union organizer, as a union activist, it was my want to ensure that everybody had the opportunity that I've had in my lifetime to go from growing up in a housing project to living in a very solid middle class existence. That my kids are never going to see the despair, the violence, the man's inhumanity to man, if you will, that I grew up with. And I see so much energy and so much time and money being spent on ripping us apart. Some of it's outside, some of it's from other countries like Russia. I know it's all a hoax. It's all a hoax, Rick. Don't believe it. Don't believe all that Russian money going into media spaces and right-wing provocateurs. Don't believe it. But the reality is there are forces out there that are trying to rip us apart. And I get a little frustrated, a little angry, and I'm sorry if that shows, because I am more passionate now than I have been in a very long time that we can make lives better, that there are people who have real ideas, that Democrats are getting things done. And look, I'm generally somebody who beats up on Democrats pretty good, because when they need a good drumming, I'm there. I got the sticks. I wish there were a functional Republican Party that cared about workers. I wish they had some ideas on how to move us forward. I wish there were some conservative ideas that say, hey, no, we're about making lives better too, other than just greed for the handfuls. But Emma, Janet, going to be just fine. I think we're all going to be just fine. We're going to get through this rough patch, and on the other side, things are going to be better. But thank you. I appreciate it. And anybody else who's concerned, I appreciate it. Thank you. And for those of you who aren't and want to send angry emails and try and bring me down, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all angry emails personally. They go to the top. They actually. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, what's the future of work look like in this country? And where do the corporate masters want to take this? I've talked about the Lochner era for a while. I'm thinking something just as bad, if not worse, is coming around the corner. Stick around. You're going to want to find out. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as you know, I'm a big supporter of the PRO Act. I'm a big supporter of workers being able to join and form unions, collectively bargaining for better wages, hours, conditions, a voice on the job, job security, all of those things. Ensuring that they have some bit of power to negotiate and claim some of the wealth that their labor creates. I look to the past and say, this is what built the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. Unity, togetherness, collective action, those things worked well for the working class. I'm now seeing a massive push on social media, in our legal documents that are being put out, a Supreme Court that seems to want us to move us back towards the Lochner era, which for those who don't know, was a time from around 1905 to about 1935, where every piece of legislation, from maximum hour laws to minimum wage laws to working condition laws, all that stuff were set aside, ruled unconstitutional under the guise of liberty of contract. You have the right to contract however you choose. It's the individual right. It's your God-given right to make a bad deal. And I'm generally not opposed to it until your idiocy affects me. And this is where this goes. So by you and you and you and you going, yeah, well, we're desperate. We're going to work for poverty wages in horrible conditions. We'll do that because we're desperate and we need the money. It pulls things down for everybody. That means everybody's going to have to compete at the bottom level. And I've always said we want to be competing on the right things. Who's the most productive? Who invents the best widget? Not who's willing to slit each other's throats for pennies. But right now, what we're hearing a lot of the same rhetoric of the Lochner era. Freedom has replaced liberty, though. Freedom. It's your freedom to be an independent contractor. It's your freedom to be a gig worker. It's your freedom. And they've sold it kind of like, well, the 21st century, we need a new employment model to meet the needs of the new century. And, that old, outdated stuff that you're talking about, Rick, just too restrictive. I hear that all the time. And it's nonsense. It's absolute bunk. Also, I hear, young people, they want a new model. They don't want their grandparents' workplace. They want flexibility and choice. And all that stuff sounds great until you realize what it means. It means shifting of responsibility. It means shifting of risk onto the individual instead of the corporation. And what I'm talking about is you look at these gig workers. And gig work is fine. We've always had it. In places where people are truly their own boss, where they choose their own work schedule, they do their own work, they choose their own path, they wear their own clothes, they have their own code of conduct, they don't have to sign on to a long list of must-dos, not drive the company logoed van that you lease from the company and wear their clothing. And no, people who are truly self-directed can pick and choose the work that they want to do or don't want to do. That's truly an independent contractor. That's truly somebody who is their own small business. And I'm all in favor of that. We absolutely need that. But I look at some companies, and there's a company that delivers stuff to people's homes quite often, where there's now a couple of them, where the person who's wearing the clothing doesn't work for the company that the clothing says. The name on the side of the van or the truck, not the company they work for. And that company tells them where they have to go, when they have to be there, what they have to do, how they have to do it, a whole code of conduct, and all of this down the line. But no, they don't work for that company. We've allowed that to happen. Now corporate America wants to go further because, that pesky minimum wage, that pesky 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act with the minimum wage and the maximum hour laws, the overtime, just too much. And what we have found is a Democrat and a couple of Republicans, Henry Cuellar from Texas, who conservative Democrat, which I would have liked to have seen him ousted in the last primary, and Republican Representatives Elise Stefanik and Michelle Steele. They introduced the Worker Flexibility and Choice Act. Because who could possibly be against worker flexibility and choice? Who could be against that, Rick? Don't you want flexibility and choice? Isn't that what you want? It's like right to work. Shouldn't everyone have the right to work? And we know the right to work language is nonsense. You're working for less, a lot less. There's no rights, and there's no work. So right to work, I'm confused at your definition. But it's what they've sold us on. So this is going to be the new kind of right to work language. The Worker Flexibility and Choice Act. And what this is going to do, if they were to get it passed, and right now it's dead in the water, but it's something that they're going to spend a lot of time, energy, and money on over the next years, because this is really what corporate America wants. They want to bring back, those good old loyalty pledges and those yellow dog contracts of the past. Only this one would be a worker flexibility agreement. And you could choose to sign this worker flexibility agreement. And by signing this, you would deem yourself an independent contractor, and you would not be covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which means no overtime, no minimum wage, no child labor laws either, I would guess. That would be gone. And now you're truly your own boss. You could work for pennies. Because that's it. Now you go, but Rick, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with me saying I want to sign the worker flexibility agreement? Well, nothing. If you truly had a choice. But what we know from these things, what we've learned from the past is, well, there isn't a choice. There isn't. When the industry goes in this way, how many employees does Lyft and Uber have? Oh, that's right, none. Were they given the choice to be employees or to be independent contractors? No, they weren't given a choice. They were said, you're an independent contractor. Follow these rules. And people were desperate looking for jobs. I was sold on the idea that I can be my own boss. I'm going to make good money. And for most people that I've talked to who do it, it's a tax cheat. That's how they make their money. They make their money off of tax cheat. Because you can write off the mileage, you can write off the car, you can write off all of your expenses like a business does. And for a couple of years, you can operate at a loss. Thus, you end up paying the car off and all that stuff. So it's a big tax cheat, and they know this. Now imagine, you're now working in a warehouse. You're working on an assembly line. You're working in an insurance office. You're working, in a healthcare field. You're working in a hospital with doctors and nurses. And now they're all people who have signed the Worker Flexibility and Choice Act. They're not actually workers. They're all independent contractors. They're all doing their own thing while being directed by a boss. But they don't have any labor rights. And they're not covered by unemployment. They're not covered by workers' comp. They're not going to get Social Security or pay into Medicare. This is a massive destruction of most of the foundational institutions of the working class. And what it's going to do, if they get their way, is create a permanent poverty class. And that's the plan. The plan is to have desperate, pliable workers who don't cause problems by wanting to organize, don't demand things like wage increases or health care. They're just happy to get the pennies that they can put food on the table at the end of the day. That, unfortunately, is the world they want to take us to. This is dangerous. And the moneyed interests, the huge moneyed interests, are going full tilt. And I love it. The Coalition for Workforce Innovation. Because who could be against workforce innovation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you download the podcast. Wherever you get yours, you'll find ours. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. That was the day President Jimmy Carter declared a federal health emergency at Love Canal in the city of Niagara Falls, New York. Premier spokeswoman, housewife Lois Gibbs, became the poster child for the citizens' environmental justice movement virtually overnight. Niagara Falls Gazette journalists had broken the story 2 years earlier. Residential sump pump testings and health surveys found a number of toxic chemicals and unusually high rates of cancers, birth defects, miscarriages, and other serious health concerns. Initially planned as a canal, the site remained abandoned until the 1940s. That's when Hooker Electrochemical Plant and the city began using the site to dispose of toxic chemicals and municipal waste. More than 20,000 tons of toxic sludge containing more than 21,000 chemicals were buried there. Then, in 1953, the city school board bought the site and built 2 schools on the property. Soon, about 1,000 families settled nearby. By the early 1970s, residents complained of foul odors, health issues, substances filling their basements, and leaky waste disposal drums popping up in their backyards, killing all plant life. Carter's initial declaration provided limited funding, but the disaster led to the passage of the Superfund Act. The neighborhood was demolished and residents were compensated and relocated. The new owner of Hooker Chemical, Occidental Petroleum, settled with the EPA for $129 million. Despite 21 years of remediation and residential redevelopment, new residents complained in 2011 of foul odors and ruptured sewer lines oozing toxic sludge. By 2014, 1,000 new complaints had been filed, contending the area had never been properly remediated. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From corporate polluters to political bosses, power elites try to create a myth of inevitability, trying to make workaday people feel helpless, too small to change the injustices of the system. Don't bother is their message. But the feisty residents of Boxtown, Tennessee definitely did bother when they learned that a couple of profiteering fossil fuel giants were targeting them. Boxtown, a historic black neighborhood of Memphis settled by former slaves 160 years ago, was considered by Valero Energy and Plains All-American Pipeline to be politically powerless. So when these multi-billion-dollar petro powers decided to ram a dirty and dangerous pipeline through the Memphis area, Boxtown was their chosen route. The rich Texas oil barons even sneeringly called the lower-income community the point of least resistance. Boy, did they get that wrong. Those, quote, small people of Boxtown resisted fiercely and smartly. Most flat out refused to sell their family land at the thieving price offered by the oil slicks. They forged a unified grassroots coalition, Memphis Community Against the Pipeline, reached out to other neighborhoods and educated locals about the terrible safety records of the 2 corporate plunderers. They also enlisted environmental groups to help beat back the strong-arm attempt by Valero and Plains All-American to seize the people's property through eminent domain. It's a long story with many ups and downs, but the inspiring essence of it is that local, quote, nobodies defeated the big money and raw racist arrogance of a powerhouse duo of absentee corporate elites that disrespected and misjudged them. This is Jim Hightower saying grassroots communities and coalitions are winning such gutsy fights against corporate exploiters all across America. Remember this, even the smallest dog can lift its leg on the tallest building.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I go back to, and I'm glad President Obama was paying attention. I just wish he'd done it in person. It's one thing to send out a tweet saying this is a BFD. It's a whole other thing. It's a whole other thing to stand behind him and actually say the words. And I know Obama can say them. I've heard he's got quite the vocabulary there. Because it's a big deal. This is a big freaking deal. The largest investment in climate in history. And look, I go back, as I've been saying all week. I hope we've learned our lesson. I grew up during the Carter era. That's when I came politically aware. Put solar panels on the White House, and the first thing that Ronnie did is rip those panels off. And well, here we are, still fighting over the dirty stuff. elections do have consequences. But here to share some thoughts on what this BFD will do and maybe how it's going to help with inflation and how it's going to help save the planet. I've asked Andrew Regan to come talk with us. Andrew is the executive director of Clean Energy for America, their website, ceforamerica.org. We'll get links out on social media. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rick.
So this is a big deal. I mean, I've been saying from the beginning, BFD, and finally Obama was listening, finally came out with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, it's almost impossible to overstate what a big deal this bill is. And I think, really importantly, as we think about what this does, it's a bill that both for, everyone who lives on the planet, but especially workers in America, are going to benefit from. And I think that is a story that we can't talk about enough.
No, I'm right there with you. Let's jump right into this. We've heard this numerous times. It's going to help save the planet. Immediately, my friends on the left are the naysayers and the doomsdayers. It's not enough. And it's not. I don't think it is. I just like the infrastructure bill wasn't enough. Historic as it was, $1.2 trillion investment in infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers says we need 4.8, but it is a huge start. And it's that first step in moving us in that direction I think is so important and also the hardest.
Yeah, could not agree more. And I think, I understand, a lot of my friends who feel frustrated that it didn't go further. Obviously, personally, I wish there was even larger investment to jumpstart this. But I think what really we need to take a look at is what's the alternative? And the alternative was not taking action. The alternative was the status quo. And so with that being our choice, I am just elated by the Inflation Reduction Act because I think there are so many provisions in here that are going to start creating jobs, that are going to lower costs for families on their utility bills. And I think we have just scratched the surface of the downstream impacts that we're going to see over the coming months, years, and next decade.
Let's start with the naysayers and the doomsdayers and all of the destroyer crowd saying, but Andrew, this is not going to do anything on inflation. It's not going to help. And look, I've said from the beginning, I don't think it's going to do much on inflation. I know Democrats are saying it's going to lower it. Republicans are going to say it's going to cause more because we're drunken spending. I don't think it's going to do a lot. But I think the investment in the climate's the big part of this. But I think it will do something, especially when you're talking about drug prices and you're talking about energy prices. So where do you see this? Do you see this being wildly helpful, mildly helpful? Where do you see this on the inflation reduction part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I see this as being very helpful on reducing inflation. And I think a couple of the pieces that jump out to me for why that is one, as you mentioned, on the prescription drug side, you're going to see lower drug costs. You're going to see not only the benefits that has to folks, but that is anti-inflationary. On the energy climate investment side, I think one of the really interesting things about this bill, both from the certainty of businesses that are going to start making these decisions, is the 10-year lifespan of a lot of these tax credits. And so it's wrong to think of this as saying, we're spending this amount of money right now. It's saying we're setting a policy that incentivizes clean energy, or at least puts it on an equal playing field over the next decade. And so, I can point to a lot of analysis that's been done out there by folks much smarter than me. But what I would say is when you're creating more clean energy that is cheaper than volatile fossil fuels, you're lowering people's energy bills. They're spending less money on that. And it's fundamentally anti-inflationary. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to solve our problems overnight, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's going to move us in the right direction. Now, I said yesterday on the show that, had we, when I was a kid, continued down the path of, putting solar panels on things and taking that technology that we were inventing, that we were coming up with, and moving that forward as a nation, we'd be so much further ahead. We probably wouldn't have had any of the misadventures we've had in the Middle East. We certainly wouldn't be involved in a lot of the conflicts, in my view. And boy, did I get a lot of pushback. But it's my view, if we're not searching for dirty stuff around the world and we don't need them, I think we're a different country. I think we're at a different place. And I'm hoping in 10 or 15 years, we can look back and go, yeah, we made the right choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting you say that, Rick, because I think when you talk about coming up in the Carter years, right, too, that's tied to the decline of manufacturing jobs in America. And I think one of the sort of under focused on aspects of this bill is the degree to which it's going to be a shot in the arm to clean energy manufacturing here in America. There are a ton of incentives in this bill that already you're seeing companies announce expansions of factories like Core Power in Arizona, 3,000 people employed there at a battery manufacturing facility that's opening. Q Cells in Georgia, which manufactures solar panels, is hiring 500 new people. And that's just, before the ink has even been dry. So when you look at this, you're building an American clean energy supply chain. And that's one of the reasons why it's honestly so baffling that not a single Republican voted for this bill. Because if you want to talk about American exceptionalism, if you want to talk about, our country being a leader in the world, becoming a hub for clean energy manufacturing, being able to be the world leader in clean energy is ours for the taking. And this bill gets us closer to that.
No, and the other part of this is, you look at most of this technology is stuff that we developed in years past that we gave away. I mean, the reason the Chinese are so far ahead is that we didn't act on it when it was created here, and people went somewhere else with their inventions and their ideas, and the Chinese were well with open arms willing to take it.
Yeah, and I think that it will be borne out by the results, but I feel very confident that what we're going to see is the return of a lot of these good-paying manufacturing jobs. There was a study by the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Blue-Green Alliance that said, based on this bill alone, that's estimated to create 9 million jobs over the next decade, which is mind-boggling. But I think it's so important to sort of look at this and say, this is not a corporate giveaway. This is a bill for working Americans that not only will lower your costs, but will actually create jobs and opportunity in a lot of communities in the Rust Belt and in the South that have been victims of this deindustrialization.
No, and that's music to my ears, because this is what I think the MAGA world heard in 2016. I know the family members that I have that voted for Trump, that's what they heard. They were going to recreate that. I grew up in Cleveland, back during the 70s when, Cleveland was still a manufacturing powerhouse. You still had steel mills, you had auto plants, you had the hundreds of feeder plants that fed into those auto plants. There were jobs were plentiful. They were good, solid wage union jobs with good wages, good benefits, your retirement security, all of those things. And I think people pine for those days. And this is an opportunity to return that kind of employment to communities all across this country. And I think if you do that, maybe you take down the anger level a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to claim I'm an expert on more than I am, but I think when you look at that fundamental question of, do you have a good paying job? Do you have a sense of community? Are you able to stay in the place where you grew up and raise a family and make a living? This bill gets us closer to that, and I think hopefully that helps solve some of those underlying issues that I think gave rise to folks who talk a good game on this issue like Trump, but don't follow through. And I think that's almost the distinction with Biden is he is delivering us what Trump promised he would but didn't, and it good paying jobs and clean energy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the two administrations, honestly, you had, all talk, no action compared to no talk, all action. I mean, honestly and truthfully, I think, Biden's got to get out there and toot his horn a little bit more. Where's the BFD talk? I mean, he should be out there, screaming that in the Rose Garden, because getting a lot done. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Andrew Reagan. He's the executive director of Clean Energy for America, ce4america.org, their website. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the incredible work that they do there. Now, again, I going back to the naysayers and the doomsdayers, we did try during the Obama years to invest in solar panels, and everyone keeps throwing up Solyndra. Why this time do you think investment is going to work in helping these industries to thrive and grow, whereas maybe they didn't in the past? Is there something different here that you see? Is there a moment? How do you see this playing going forward?
Yeah, I mean, two quick things I would say. One, I would push back on the premise a little, which I think is, while Solyndra was an example of, one of those loans not paying off, that was the purpose, and that was the reason of that program, was to take a bet on a set of technologies that needed loan guarantees to make them happen. And while Solyndra obviously was not what they had hoped, that recovery package included $90 billion in clean energy tax credits that I would argue set the stage in many ways for the exponential growth we're seeing. So I live in Austin, Texas, and here in Texas, we have, government that's not always friendly to clean energy, but over the past 3 years, over the past 6 years, solar has expanded 39 times, like 39x. And that is in many ways because of the investments that were made under the Obama administration to help get some of these companies off the ground. So, but taking the premise at its face, what I'll say is when you look at the clean energy industry today compared to a decade ago, they are in such a different place. Already in this country, 3.1 million Americans work in clean energy jobs, wind, solar, energy efficiency, transmission, you name it. And, so this is something that is going to continue to grow those jobs, continue to grow these projects. And in many cases, clean energy is already more affordable and cheaper than fossil fuels. This is just going to set us on that trajectory at the speed we need to go to meet our climate goals.
Yeah, and the reason I brought up Solyndra is that is the popular whipping boy of the right.
Sure.
When Obama moved forward on solar, it's the reason that we were able to put solar panels on our house. It was the federal, tax credits along with the state sunshine fund that made it, much more affordable for us to put those panels on our house back in 2012. And here we are a decade later, still doing great. We produce about a little more than half of our electricity, and I'm looking forward to being able to produce the other half now that there might be some investment in this. So
Yeah.
from a purely selfish point of view, I'm glad we're doing this because maybe I'll get off the grid entirely, which will free up energy for other things and lower costs and do all those great things. But again, radical self-interest. I think it's going to help me.
No, and I mean, not only you, Rick, it's going to help Americans across the country, both folks who are, traditionally seen as folks who can go solar, but also low and middle income consumers who are going to benefit from some of these programs. This law has the single largest expansion of low and middle income residential solar programs in history. And it also has tax incentives, many of which are, direct pay. So they're, you don't have to wait to file your taxes, for improving the insulation in your home, for getting a heat pump, sort of all of these upgrades that, you have to do over the course of the life of being a homeowner. That makes it easier, it makes it cheaper. And, at some point it gets us away from this paradigm of everyone has to sacrifice to make this happen. And it gets us to the point of you can have better, nicer future. And we're going to create a tax policy that actually incentivizes doing the right thing when it comes to making upgrades to your home.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm a little angry about that part of it. A little angry.
Sure. And
I'll tell you why. I'm a little angry.
Yeah.
Because my wife just bought a refrigerator and a new stove and a new dishwasher, and I'm not going to get tax credits for that. I'm a little angry about that. Where was it when I needed it?
Sure. Well, the good news is you can still look into a heat pump. You can still look into some of those insulations. So I hear you, but fingers crossed that you're still able to get something.
No, I'm just kidding. I mean, the reality is it's something that we need now. The part that I would wish is in there, and maybe you're going to tell me that, no, Rick, it's there, is I wish all of those things, the heat pumps, the stoves, the washer and dryers, all the things that we're going to make more energy efficient, I wish we made them here. I wish there was a Made in America provision to this going, yeah, you buy the Made in America ones that are putting your neighbors to work. That's where you get the tax credit.
Yeah. So, I'll give it with the caveat of I have not read the entire bill, but I've read summaries by much smarter people. But while there are not necessarily in all cases that direct, requirement, there are a lot of core incentives to change the domestic supply chain, like I talked about earlier, when it comes to domestic manufacturing, that are built into a lot of these projects. So, for example, on large generation projects, by having a certain amount of domestic made content in them, you're able to get these higher tax breaks. So companies who, for them, it's just running the numbers. It's going to become, it's going to make not only the right thing to do, the patriotic thing to do, it's going to make financial sense to companies who are putting together these projects to start using more components that are made in America. And what that does is create the certainty of demand for a lot of these companies to expand. So while I 100% hear you on, it would be great to have that across the board, I think we're going in the right direction toward that ideal future.
Yeah, but here again, what I'm saying is this is where I'd like to go. This is perfect. This was possible. So we got possible done. We can work towards perfect.
Yeah. Well, once what I say to folks as I'm talking about this, I'm elated that this law passed. I'm incredibly happy. A month ago, we were not thinking that we were going to get anything. But in some ways, the work is just getting started because, these are things that need to be implemented. These are things that the millions of American workers who are in clean energy need to build out. And so what I'm just so excited about, but also determined about, is that there's a ton of work ahead of us to make this all possible. But I believe that with this law, we have the tools as a country to, not only meet our climate goals and keep a livable planet, but to create more good paying jobs that, we have not seen for decades in many communities.
No, and the fact that we've got Joe Biden in the White House who's talking about making those jobs union jobs, to me, that's the important part of it. Look, we can create millions of jobs, but if they don't pay anything, they don't have, health care benefits, they don't have retirement security, they don't have safe working conditions. I don't know the kind of jobs we want. We want good, solid wage union jobs, safe working conditions, all of that stuff. Last question I've got for you. They're touting the fact that on the energy side, the average family is going to save about $1,800 a year. They're talking about seniors being able to save up to $2,000 a year annually on prescription drug costs. There's a bunch of savings potentially in this to help reduce inflation. I get the drug part. How is it that people are going to save about $1,800 a year on the energy front?
Yeah, so happy to dive into that more. That includes multiple factors. So, one of the ones we talked about is incentives for some people to, get more energy efficient systems installed at a competitive price because of the rebate program. But the core piece of this is, when you sort of think about it, it makes a lot of intuitive sense, is this will increase the share of clean energy generation for power across the country. And when you look at the stats, wind and solar are the two cheapest forms of energy that you have. They are, Vladimir Putin cannot put an embargo on the sun or the wind. And so when you're building this out, when you're increasing clean energy as a share of the grid, that turns into lower costs for consumers. So a lot of this is just in your utility bills. They're going to start being lower, maybe not tomorrow, but over the coming months and years, because of that increased clean energy component to the overall mix. No,
it's good stuff. All good stuff here. I'm thrilled. This is steal Obama's line, which was Joe Biden's line. This is a BFD. But Andrew, I appreciate you taking time for us. Look forward to having you come back again as this continues and we grow this out and people start saving and, we start telling the naysayers where to go.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Great to be with you, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew Reagan, Executive Director there of the Clean Energy for America Group. Make sure you check out their website, ce4america.org. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the work that they do. Quick break, right back. Remember, if you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you get yours, you'll find ours from iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, everywhere in between. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1985. That was the day that workers at the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota, went out on strike. They were members of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local P9. Hormel had slashed workers' wages by 23% during the early 1980s. Benefits were also diminished, and incentive programs rolled back. These changes cut deeply into the Hormel workers' earnings. What had been considered a good job was changing drastically. This was the story for many workers in Reagan-era America. The 3,500 Hormel workers voted overwhelmingly to strike. The National UFCW discouraged the action. The strike lasted more than a year. Strikebreakers were brought in, including some of the union members who crossed the picket line to return to work. The National Guard was called in to keep the peace between strikers and the scabs. After a year, the strike went down in defeat. Even after the strike, many of the workers were not called back to work. They were put on waiting lists for a job to reopen. Some never returned to the plant. 25 years after the strike, the Austin Daily Herald staff wrote, quote, "What resulted was a bitter, drawn-out labor dispute that drastically impacted the community, from workers who lost their jobs to families that were torn apart by the picket lines." The strike became the feature of a documentary by Barbara Koppel. In 1990, the documentary American Dream won the Academy Award. The film tells the story of the Hormel strike as a window into the tragic experiences of many workers during the 1980s. The film was made on a shoestring budget. Singer Bruce Springsteen provided $25,000 to help support this important film. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Gotta tell you, we can't get there fast enough to get off the dirty stuff. At least it's been my view for a very long time. The quicker we can get off of foreign oil, the quicker we can get off of frack gas, the quicker we can get off all of that stuff, the happier I'm going to be. And I look at this recent study done by the folks at the Yale School of Public Health, published in Environmental Health Perspectives journal. This research paper looked at the cancer rates of children between the ages of 2 and 7 in places, and this is one of those interesting things, and I love the phrasing, love the phraseology that they use, in places in proximity to unconventional oil and gas development, fracking. The hydraulic fracturing that they're doing, especially here in Pennsylvania, we're fracking like crazy. What they found is kids between 2 and 7, the rates of leukemia 2 to 3 times higher than kids who weren't near fracking. And you go, how's that possible? How is it possible? Well, what they were looking at is drinking water being one of the pathways into these kids. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the movie that was done where the guy lights his faucet on fire. Maybe you've seen it. He turns on the water faucet and just puts a match near it, and flames are shooting out of his faucet because the gas is mixing in with his drinking water. Because when you punch giant holes in the ground, stuff goes places, and one of the places it goes into the water. And look, I've seen some of the water that comes out of there. We knew people who lived in Dimmock, which is one of the places that has just been destroyed by fracking. One of the couples that I met, they built their dream house. I mean, beautiful, beautiful, giant A-frame home. One of those, actually it was the A chalet kind of things. It was just a beautiful, beautiful. They can't get rid of it because the water is, you don't even want to shower in it. And they're stuck there. And they're worried about, hey, are they next? With cancer rates the way they are in those places, it's what they also found in this is that and this is one of those things you go, makes sense, that the kids were exposed in utero. Now remember, for all those pro-life folks, people who love the children, shouldn't we be getting the unborn decent water? And I guess that's the question. Now, does that matter now? Are they able to be considered when in talking about fracking, or is fracking something different? So for me, the quicker that we can get off of this dirty stuff, the stuff that we know is causing harm to our environment, to our health, to our communities. And I know it's just those areas, somebody else's backyard. It's not ours by any chance. This is one of those things. Now, you look at the fracking stuff, which is horrible because of the stuff that they use to pump into the ground to cause the little explosions. A lot of that stuff has suspected cancer links or known cancer links. But hey, that was going to be our bridge, right? That was going to get us off the dirty stuff. And it was going to be better. And understand, here in this state where I live, we've built pipelines all over the place. Question is How long is it going to take before we get off of that? Which is why I'm thrilled with the investment that we're making in clean energy going to move us forward. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Love to hear it. Again, if you missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find yours, you'll find ours. And if you don't find it, let me know, and we'll make sure we get it there. That's simple.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 207. The motion is adopted.
Historic Inflation Reduction Act passes Congress. Just don't call it a climate bill.
I'm gonna.
Scientists surprised to find trees now growing in the Arctic. Plus, 100 million Americans will live in an extreme heat belt by 2050, study warns.
All of those warnings and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It has been a busy week and a huge one for the president, with Congress passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes the single largest investment in combating climate change in U.S. history. In any other week, that would have completely dominated the headlines, but not this one.
Well, it's still dominating our headlines. This is the Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this headline from Fox News of all places, quote, Dodge announces last call for V8-powered muscle cars before they go electric.
The times they are a-changin'.
Sad. What do you got for us today, Desi Doyen?
Well, first, even though Democrats passed the largest climate action in U.S. history,
Yay.
Man-made global warming has not stopped yet.
Boo.
New findings show that climate scientists have underestimated the rate of Arctic warming. It's not warming 2 times faster than the rest of the planet, it's 4 times faster.
Uh-oh.
And that has consequences.
Yep.
Transforming fragile ecosystems, disrupting animal migration, and releasing even more carbon from melting permafrost. Plus, Arctic warming is increasingly linked to changes in the jet stream that cause extreme weather systems to stall in place.
Joe Biden can't sign that bill soon enough.
And researchers publishing in the journal Nature say that they were surprised to find spruce trees growing in the Arctic tundra for the first time, hundreds of miles farther north than their normal range, a century earlier than climate scientists had predicted.
Oops.
In the lower 48 states, a new study warns that by 2050, about a third of the U.S. population will live in an extreme heat belt, where the heat index is projected to hit 125 degrees Fahrenheit at least one day a year.
125 degrees Fahrenheit?
That's the heat index, which combines temperature and humidity to arrive at how hot it feels outside.
Oh, well, that's not that bad.
Huge swaths of the country will fall into this extreme heat belt, particularly the Southeast and the Midwest. Right now, only 50 U.S. counties are expected to reach a heat index of 125 degrees at least once a year, but by 2050, that will jump to more than 1,000 counties.
Wow.
And the rise in extreme heat will hit non-white communities the hardest. The report includes a database where you can look up the heat projections for your neighborhood. We'll have a link at greennews.bradblog.com. Meanwhile, as we go to air, President Biden later today will be signing the Inflation Reduction Act, the Democrats' landmark climate, tax, and health care bill, which passed Congress with 0 Republican votes.
I thought we weren't supposed to call it a climate bill.
I'm calling it a climate bill because it contains the largest federal climate investment in U.S. history, directing $370 billion to investments in clean energy and infrastructure spread out economy-wide to decarbonize both U.S. industry and households. It builds U.S.-based clean energy manufacturing and a domestic supply chain. It is the first U.S. industrial policy of any kind in decades.
And it comes not a moment too soon.
Several independent analyses confirm that the bill will cut U.S. carbon emissions roughly 40% by 2030. Major concessions were made to secure the required vote of Coal State Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, including a requirement to offer more public lands for oil and gas extraction alongside renewables and much more. Next, Manchin will get a separate bill later this fall that will streamline permitting for energy infrastructure, both fossil and renewable, angering environmental groups and frontline communities who say they will fight to shape that bill. However, even with those propose concessions to the fossil fuel industry, the consensus of climate policy experts is that the provisions will likely speed up the transition away from fossil fuels, according to energy journalist David Roberts in a recent broadcast.
It's a giant bag of carrots. So the theory of change here is that these carrots will accelerate the development of renewable energy even further, even faster, and it's going to undercut the economics of fossil fuels even further, even faster. And so fossil fuels are just going to lose on the market. So one of the things the models find is this bill is going to cause a net reduction in U.S. demand for oil and gasoline for the first time ever.
And finally, another major benefit, the law will cut deadly toxic air pollution, reducing childhood asthma and saving lives.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So on Monday, you had workers at the Air Hub in San Bernardino, California, walking off the job mid-shift over safe working conditions, over poor wages. And look, this is kind of a theme if you think about it. You know, we've been hearing this at Amazon facilities across the country. This is the first time that there's been a coordinated labor action at Amazon's growing air freight division. This is kind of a big deal. That's why I have asked Sarah Fee to come talk with us. Sarah's an Amazon worker at the KSBD in San Bernardino. Well, the folks who did the walking out, they are organizing with IE Amazon Workers United. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So walk me through what, we've heard the reports. I've read the stories. Why? What happened Monday? Why?
It was time. Things in our building were at a fever pitch. The economy is playing a big role. A lot of people can't pay their bills. They can't. It's back to school for the kids. They can't buy their kids clothes or shoes.
So
my coworkers.
You're the folks who are supplying all of us with the things we need for our kids. You're the ones you made sure we got through the pandemic. You're the folks who make sure we get our stuff on time and keep us going, and you yourself can't get what you need. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Absolutely. That's what's happening.
So what's the demand then?
Better wages and a safe place to work, and just to be treated fairly and equally by our employer.
Now, you brought up safe working conditions, and there have been a number of studies out there. I know, recently we had a guest on talking about Amazon being, the leader in the warehousing industry for injuries in the workplace. Tell me about the conditions under which you work there in San Bernardino.
Well, I load up the trucks, and right now the biggest thing is the heat. Like, some of my coworkers are outside with the airplanes, and it's super hot out there, and so they're struggling. They're getting nosebleeds. They're feeling nauseous. They're not getting the support that they need to be safe at work, and it's affecting their health and their well-being.
So what's the demand here? I mean, this is going to be something ongoing, especially as the climate warms. Just yesterday I was talking about a report that there's going to be a new heat belt here in the U.S., everywhere from Illinois down to Texas and the whole Southwest. I'm sure California is going to be a huge part of that, especially the Inland Empire. So what's the want? What's the demand on how to deal with this?
Well, I mean, there's regulations. They're supposed to be taking breaks often to be able to cool down. Those things are not enforced. Like, the work is more important than the people.
Yeah, that seems to happen a lot. Now, we've heard horror stories in other Amazon facilities of, constant monitoring and constant, harassing over production and, machines telling you what to do every second of the day. And I would have to assume that they could easily program break time into that, couldn't they?
They most definitely could, and they're not.
So
we know our rights. And that's why we're fighting back.
And that's an important thing. So you had a number of folks walk out on Monday. So what was the response to the workers walking out?
Well, the workers were really, really proud of themselves, and we're strong, and their bravery is commendable.
No.
Also, though, when someone takes a chance like that, they put themselves out there for retaliation, right? So there's a certain level of intimidation that we have to overcome to be able to take actions like we did, like the walkout.
No, and I think that's an important part because, in this country at this moment, what you're talking about is a courageous act because I don't know that our laws protect workers anywhere near enough. So for this kind of thing to happen and increasingly happening across the U.S. shows me that the workplaces aren't hospitable, they aren't safe, and wages are way too low, and people are finally had enough of it. So let me ask you, I'm sure you've been doing this a while. Did you ever think you'd be involved in something like this? Did you ever think that you were going to be this kind of an activist?
You know what? I heard. I went to a meeting that we had at work, and I heard some coworkers speak up on some issues, and it changed my thinking. And I was like, you know what? I work with these people every day, and they're like family, and they're going through all these things, and I'm not doing anything about it. And I couldn't stand by and watch anymore. So I decided to make the jump and be supportive to the people that I care about.
Good for you. So what do you say to the person, Sarah, who goes, well, if you don't like it there, you could leave, go somewhere else?
In this economy, the way that we're at now, there's layoffs all over right now. So, to go and try to find another job, it's tough. People are scared.
Yeah. And I would also throw the other argument in there, and a lot of people that I've talked to say, going across the street, the conditions are almost identical, if not the same. So you're not making anything better. How about stay, fight, and change things so that we make it better and we don't have to leave?
I totally agree with you. The IE needs to be unified in this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what do you say to your coworkers? Because this is an organizing opportunity for you guys to get folks on board with you. What's the argument for your other coworkers to go? You know what, we do need this voice. We do need this worker power to ensure that we have safe working conditions. We get a fair share of the wealth that our labor creates. What's the argument to them?
The argument is that we should treat each other like human beings, right? The company we work for doesn't do that, right? But we can. We can stand up for each other. We can stick together, and we can make a difference at Amazon.
Yeah. Now walk me through your normal day. You said you load trucks and you do that. What's that like? What are the conditions under which you work, and how could we make that better? What kind of demands are you asking for? Because and the reason I ask this is I get people who go, well, you want such outlandish demands, you unrealistic demands. So I'm curious, what is it that would make Sarah's life better? What would make your coworkers' lives better? What kind of things are you asking for?
Well, heat protection is like the major thing right now. We need to take care of the people that are affected by the heat. When we open the doors on the trailers that I load, the heat, it's so hot that it almost makes you stagger. And going in and out of those hot trucks, it makes you nauseous after a while. And it's not just me that's nauseous, it's other people that I work with. They feel the same way.
And how could we how can you make that better? What could Amazon do to make that better? What would make your life easier, make your workday safer? If you had a company that really cared, then I know they say they got an open door policy. I've read the stories. They care. They put out the right press releases. But what actions could they take that would go, yeah, we really do care about you, Sarah. We care about your coworkers. We care about the people who make us profitable, the people who make us, one of the biggest companies in the world. Yeah, we really care about you, and this is how we're going to show it. What could they do?
Well, definitely like more fans, maybe turning down the air a little bit. Like I think there's some actions they could take. I mean, this is a huge company. I'm not an engineer. So, I mean, I'm sure they have engineers, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure if they wanted to spend the money to make it better for us, they could easily do that.
See, now you said the magic word. You got to spend money. That means taking away from profit. And well, you're replaceable. At least that's how I view corporate America's view of we working people. And that's why, again, I come back to what you guys did on Monday is so very important to show corporate America that workers can be and are united and fighting for better wages, hours, and yes, safe working conditions. So where do you see this going forward, Sarah?
Well, I hope that we make a difference, not just for me or the people that I work with now, but for everybody that works for Amazon or everybody that works in a warehouse. Let's change the standard of how we treat each other.
That seems like a good thing. And look, even if you're a short timer, you're only going to be there a couple of months. Fight to make things better for the next person who comes along who has to do these jobs.
That's
right. Because for me, at the end of the day, this is about building worker power and worker ability to have a say in their working conditions. So, in response to what happened on Monday, have you gotten any feedback from the company? Has management said, hey, we heard what you had to say, we're going to make some changes? Have you been met with resistance? What kind of reaction have you gotten, or is it too soon to tell?
They pretty much treated me like I have leprosy. Like they don't really talk to me. They don't really look at me. Like I'm definitely like hands off.
And that's not fair, is it?
No, it makes me feel isolated.
So how long have you been working for Amazon?
About a year and 4 months.
And is that generally long time? Because a lot of the people that I've talked to who work for Amazon go, you're in 4 months. You've got the long whiskers. Then that seems like a long time for an Amazon employee. How are what kind of conditions are there where you're at?
I mean, it is like staying there. There are some people that got hired when I was hired, and we're still there. We're still there.
But this could be one of those things that could help with turnover. Because as I understand, and I look at some of the organizing campaigns that have gone on around the country, the one in Bessemer where they had 150% turnover rate.
Yeah, the churn and burn is definitely real, and I think that's well known.
So the reason I want to end up in this space is because, I look at what you guys are doing as not just, about making your lives better, obviously better wages, hours, conditions, but also helping the company in a way that is going to help them to do better, to be able to be more profitable by keeping workers and not going through so many people and having productive people who stick around, because ultimately that's what you want. I mean, because when I have people who push back against what you're doing, Sarah, they're saying, well, they hate Amazon. Do you guys hate Amazon?
You know what? Like sometimes it's not such a bad place, but you know what makes it good is the people that we work with.
There you go.
So like when I go into work and I'm working with this guy that I work with for a year and 4 months, we're laughing, we're joking, we're having a good time. Like I know him, so it's not all bad. But the work is definitely something that needs to be addressed. They put pressure on us to work at an unsafe pace, and so that's dangerous. And a lot of people get injured because of that.
Again, sounds like so many problems, but I think you guys are on the right path. I wish you the best, and I hope as this continues, you come back and keep us updated on where you're going and what you're doing.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick.
I appreciate the time, Sarah. Thanks so much, Sarah Fee. She is one of the Amazon workers who walked out on Monday. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Is this a big deal in your workplace? Is heat an issue? I've worked in the trucking industry for years, and I'll tell you, you get up into some of those trailers. It is not good. It's not helpful. It's not safe. But good on them. Appreciate the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interestingly enough, the latest YouGov poll found that we the people overwhelmingly approve of the FBI searching the Golden Palace. 54 to 36 Americans say that, yeah, you know, we should go get our documents. And I think this is why you're seeing a lot of conservatives now going, maybe Laura Ingraham going, hey, maybe it's time to turn the page. Maybe it's time to move along. Maybe it's time to, de-Trump. But I'll tell you, Trump's got his claws into the Republican Party, but I think it's going to cost them because you look at some of the big races. Now, look, the gerrymandered races, the states that are, Wyoming, that were no Democrat was ever going to win, and Republicans have, just a death grip. Yeah, crazies abound. But I look at the most recent polling coming out of Florida. It's got Val Deming up 4 points over Marco Rubio. That's kind of a big deal. It's the latest polling coming out of Wisconsin's got Mandela Barnes over Ron John by 7 points. You look at here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, it's got Fetterman over Oz by I think double digits. You got Tim Ryan in Ohio beating J.D. Vance. You kind of got to go, well, oops-ish. Maybe they've gone too far. And, I look at our quote of the day here in Pennsylvania. And again, this is what happens when you put out really bad candidates. And understand, Dr. Oz, the candidate for Senate here in the state of Pennsylvania, a really, really bad candidate. I mean, really bad. I don't know who's advising him, but a bad candidate. Was asked about how many houses he owns. He says he's got 2. He actually owns 10. And as John Fetterman said, he goes, I can tell you that I've never spoken to a Pennsylvania who doesn't know how many houses they have, let alone be off by 8. He just doesn't get it. This dude is not one of us. And it's true. I don't know how in central Pennsylvania Oz is going to play. Now, this is supposed to be the home of this Trump country. He got Trump's endorsement. Going to be interesting. Now, I'm looking at Georgia, possibly going to hold on to the seat in Georgia, which means that Democrats could actually strengthen their lead in the Senate in a year that is supposed to be a wave. A year where conservatives have told me, no, it's going to be a red wave. But again, it comes back to, I think there are still some voters, and we're going to find out come November. There's still a long way down the road, but early indications, the American people are waking up to just how extreme the Republican Party is. Just how far off the beaten path they are. And I think the more that comes out about what we found in the Golden Palace, the more that comes out about Trump's dealings with his business dealings, and all of the stuff that's going to come out because of Weisselberg. I think the more that comes out about what happened in Georgia, and all of the just blatant, outright attempts to steal an election by the people who told us they're going to stop the steal, while behind the scenes, trying to steal an election. And I think this story hasn't gotten enough attention. It's something that I've been talking about for a while. It's something my friend, former Ohio Congressman Bob Ney, has brought up a number of times. This $2 billion that Jared Kushner got, finally getting some traction, finally getting someone to pay attention, going, wait a second, why did the Saudis give Jared Kushner $2 billion to start this new private equity firm? Why would they do that? It's not like he has some investor prowess that nobody else has. It's not that he's some boy genius on Wall Street. Could it be? Could it be he had a father-in-law? And this is again one of those moments. One of those moments, because I at least get usually 3 or 4 emails every day with, what about Hunter Biden's laptops? And my answer is, they're going to investigate it, and I don't care about Hunter Biden. Don't care about his laptops unless you can prove that somehow Joe Biden, twisted some arms to get him what he needed. Nepotism has always been part of our game. Unless you can prove that somehow Biden used undue influence to get him ahead, it doesn't matter what Hunter Biden did, in my view. If he broke the law, he will be held accountable. As I always say, don't break the law. If you break the law, you'll be held accountable. But why hasn't this Kushner deal gotten more scrutiny? $2 billion from the Saudis. Not a question. Not a question from the, what about Hunter Biden's laptop crowd? And I hate doing that tick for tack. I hate doing that. Well, what about Hunter Biden? Well, what about Jared Kushner? No, I don't care about Hunter Biden at all. Again, unless, like I said, you can bring it back to, this is the action that Joe Biden did. Nobody can do that. I'm looking at this $2 billion and I'm going, wait a second. He was the guy who was sent over to Saudi Arabia to be, kind of our boy genius. He was the guy who was going to bring peace to the Middle East. He was the direct line to Donald Trump. This seems like, I don't know. This seems like a direct quid pro quo. This really shady, to where everybody should be going, wait a second. But not going to happen. Now, like I said, I think it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of days, weeks, and months as Republicans try and move away from Trump. In fact, his vice president says he's considering testifying. If he's asked, he'll testify. While simultaneously begging the Republican parties, please stop attacking the FBI. Because remember, they're supposed to be the party of law and order. It's kind of hard to be the party of law and order when you're attacking the FBI. And finally, this segment, I'm looking at the story that evidently Trump's having a really hard time finding a good criminal lawyer. He needs them, not just in Georgia, but with this dispute with the National Archives. This could be trouble for him. And evidently, they're rushing to assemble, some respected legal minds, and evidently they're all telling him no. So he could end up with the dream team of, get the old band back together from the Four Seasons Landscaping Company press conference. Bring back Giuliani if he's got a license yet. That's Sidney Powell. You get that Lynn Wood. Maybe you get an honorary law degree for the pillow guy. That would be a dream team. That would be a dream team, legal team. But here's the thing. It's not surprising he can't find a lawyer, especially for these really big cases, because you think about it, a lawyer should be just chomping at the bit because there's a lot of billable hours here. But what they all know, and is what we all know, the reality is whoever the lawyer is, they're going to get stiffed. You do know that, right? he's going to walk out on the check. Somebody's going to get left holding the bag. I don't know if it'll be the RNC, but somebody's going to get stiffed on this. That's just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Make sure you grab the podcast. Always there, always available. Share it with your friends. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1985. That was the day that workers at the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota, went out on strike. They were members of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local P9. Hormel had slashed workers' wages by 23% during the early 1980s. Benefits were also diminished, and incentive programs rolled back. These changes cut deeply into the Hormel workers' earnings. What had been considered a good job was changing drastically. This was the story for many workers in Reagan-era America. The 3,500 Hormel workers voted overwhelmingly to strike. The National UFCW discouraged the action. The strike lasted more than a year. Strikebreakers were brought in, including some of the union members who crossed the picket line to return to work. The National Guard was called in to keep the peace between strikers and the scabs. After a year, the strike went down in defeat. Even after the strike, many of the workers were not called back to work. They were put on waiting lists for a job to reopen. Some never returned to the plant. 25 years after the strike, the Austin Daily Herald staff wrote, quote, "What resulted was a bitter, drawn-out labor dispute that drastically impacted the community, from workers who lost their jobs to families that were torn apart by the picket lines." The strike became the feature of a documentary by Barbara Koppel. In 1990, the documentary American Dream won the Academy Award. The film tells the story of the Hormel strike as a window into the tragic experiences of many workers during the 1980s. The film was made on a shoestring budget. Singer Bruce Springsteen provided $25,000 to help support this important film. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From corporate polluters to political bosses, power elites try to create a myth of inevitability, trying to make workaday people feel helpless, too small to change the injustices of the system. Don't bother is their message. But the feisty residents of Boxtown, Tennessee definitely did bother when they learned that a couple of profiteering fossil fuel giants were targeting them. Boxtown, a historic black neighborhood of Memphis settled by former slaves 160 years ago, was considered by Valero Energy and Plains All-American Pipeline to be politically powerless. So when these multi-billion-dollar petro powers decided to ram a dirty and dangerous pipeline through the Memphis area, Boxtown was their chosen route. The rich Texas oil barons even sneeringly called the lower-income community the point of least resistance. Boy, did they get that wrong. Those, quote, small people of Boxtown resisted fiercely and smartly. Most flat out refused to sell their family land at the thieving price offered by the oil slicks. They forged a unified grassroots coalition, Memphis Community Against the Pipeline, reached out to other neighborhoods and educated locals about the terrible safety records of the two corporate plunderers. They also enlisted environmental groups to help beat back the strong-arm attempt by Valero and Plains All-American to seize the people's property through eminent domain. It's a long story with many ups and downs, but the inspiring essence of it is that local, quote, nobodies defeated the big money and raw racist arrogance of a powerhouse duo of absentee corporate elites that disrespected and misjudged them. This is Jim Hightower saying grassroots communities and coalitions are winning such gutsy fights against corporate exploiters all across America. Remember this, even the smallest dog can lift its leg on the tallest building. The Hightower...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I want to go back to what I was talking about earlier, the future of work in America, this idea that the 21st century needs, flexibility, it needs choice, we need new options, not that stodgy old restrictive labor law from the 1930s. No, We don't need those old minimum wage laws or those old maximum hour laws. And never mind, the fights that it took to get those put into place and the history of how horrible it was before. Never mind any of that. We're better than that today. So much better. So when I look at the stories, like we talked about the story at the New York Times about, how they're tracking everything we do under the guise of productivity. And now this new idea of, hey, we're going to have a new kind of, a new kind of agreement between employers and employees. It's no longer going to be master and servant like it is here in Pennsylvania workers' comp law. No, it's going to be worker flexibility. And here to share some thoughts on worker flexibility, I've asked Dr. Peter Cole to come talk with us. He's a professor of history at Western Illinois University. Peter, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, it's an honor to be on your show, Rick. Thanks.
So, I'm looking at this. I can only laugh when I hear the name of this because it's so almost Orwellian. The Worker Flexibility and Choice Act, which is going to lead to workers being able to sign worker flexibility agreements, which would then say, yeah, you don't want that pesky minimum wage. You don't need that pesky overtime law. You're a gig worker. You've got flexibility. You're your own boss, Peter. You're the guy.
Yes, aren't I lucky? It's like the right to work for less.
Yeah, but this is even kind of worse than that, in that, less is one thing, but, almost nothing is another.
Yeah. Well, flexibility is, of course, management speak for having more power over workers. And so I agree with you. Orwellian is sort of the right word to describe this sort of bill. I hope and trust it's not actually going to sort of go anywhere.
I hope not. But, you as a historian, I mean, this has got to trigger, the first thing I thought when I thought of this, I'm thinking yellow dog contracts. I'm remembering the history of that going, you go to an employer and they say, well, I'm willing to hire you, but you got to sign this saying that under no circumstance will you ever join a union. And if you do, you're going to be fired. But it's your choice to sign the yellow dog contract. And obviously we both know if you don't sign it, you don't get the job. This kind of reeks of that to me.
Yeah, very much. It is very similar to that. I think when those sort of contracts, when those rules were created in the late 19th and early 20th century, I think they were Supreme Court rulings. And so fortunately didn't have quite as much power as the power of a potential law, right? But yeah, I mean, the idea that employers want maximum power, obviously now there are so many tens of millions of workers who are in precarious situations because they don't have steady contracts. And this sort of bill would only sort of contribute further to that. The truth of the matter is that workers have been on their backs and sort of been pushed further down for the last 50 or 60 years, right? And so this is part of a long-term trend that, hopefully, I want to stop. I forget, who did you say sponsored this bill?
Well, Henry Callara from Texas and Republicans Elise Stefanik and Michelle Steele.
Right.
They introduced this at the end of July. Now, it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, but this is the Lyft and the Uber wet dream.
Yes.
This is the, taking us back to the Lochner days of, no laws that we can possibly have for, maximum hour or minimum wage laws. This is, liberty of contract, I think, on a lesser scale. Only you don't have liberty or freedom. They're just going to shove a contract in front of you and say, sign it or you don't get the job. I don't know if there's any liberty and freedom in that.
No, it doesn't. It, of course, also sort of begs the question, what was Pelosi and others thinking when they were backing this congressman instead of his rival in the special election, 1 or 2 months ago?
Yeah, don't get me started.
Yeah, I won't. I'll try not to.
No, because there are horrible Democrats, and there is one. I would like to see him out because, bad conservatives are bad conservatives, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And here he is introducing this piece of legislation that would be horribly destructive. But yet we're being sold, Peter, that this is good for the working class. This is going to give flexibility and choice. It's going to give gig workers an opportunity to do the things that they love, which is work for poverty wages in desperate conditions.
Yeah. So living the dream in the United States. It is frustrating when when people who claim to represent the people promote bills that in fact would hurt the people, right? Like, of course, this is, like you said, hardly new. And you're even naming a whole bunch of important Supreme Court cases from previous eras that where sort of 5 to 9 angry men, promoted sort of very pro-corporate legislation. The sanctity of the contract apparently is more important than the sanctity of ordinary people in some people's minds.
And I think we have a court right now. I think the Roberts Court is going to be the new horrible corporate court. I shouldn't say going to be. I believe they already are. If you look at the studies that have been done, overwhelmingly, this court, more than any in the history of this country, has sided with corporate America. And I got to tell you, that's a horrible thing if you're a working person.
Yeah. Or even if you're no longer working. Alito, of course, wrote a lot of these bills and or sort of rulings, and I mean, it harkens back to Citizens United, right?
No, I mean, mother corporations are people, unless we want to make sure that they follow the law.
Yep. Yes. They can't bleed, they don't live, they don't die, but they have almost all the same rights as you and I do. Until we change those, we will be stuck with these other sort of horrible decisions and laws, I think.
And it's going to continually progressively get worse. And this is where my concern is, and why you as a historian is, someone I wanted to talk to, because I think we have, as a country, not forgotten. I think we've been systematically deprogrammed to understand what our history is, especially when talking about labor and the history of what it took to fight for, minimum wage laws, to get overtime, to get safe working conditions, to get the things, the few restrictions, the few regulations that are in place that protect workers, what it took to get those things. I fear we're going to end up trading them away for some dream of flexibility and choice that we don't really and never really have ever had.
Yeah, well, I mean, I often teach my students in my U.S. history classes, which start next semester in a week, that, in a way, like, libertarians dream of essentially returning to the 19th century, but in fact, the great majority of Americans fought for generations to get away from that, right? I always say to people who are sort of anti-government or libertarians that, like, just go back to the 1870s, and you'll see there's a reason that the great majority of people in both major parties actually fought to sort of essentially roll back corporate power, right? And that slowly but steadily in the early 1900s into the mid 1900s, that happened, right? The government grew because the people wanted it to grow, because only the government can possibly stand up to corporate power in a capitalist economy.
And I think that's an important fact to point out. So all of this effort that's put in to hate your government, to hate everything about it, government's bad, all of that messaging is specifically to ensure that corporate America continues to retain power and grow its power. And I just say, look, I've got my problems with government like everybody else does. But I know they're the only check we have on unbridled corporate power. And look, I know there are some who want to take us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have a time machine, I suggest that people visit Lebanon, where it's a beautiful country, great food, nice people, but they don't have a government. It literally doesn't work. Everything is privatized, and the government is sort of in perpetual collapse. And the great majority suffer. Right, the only people actually who can afford clean water are the rich, right? Like, and so libertarians should book their next flight to Beirut and spend a week or two and actually try to live in a place that has no functioning government and come back and talk to me, right? Like, until you've visited such a place, or I don't know, maybe Somalia, but I've been to Lebanon, I just laugh in the face of libertarians, right? Like, they simply don't understand what they actually think they believe, right? Because they haven't experienced a society that, as I tell my students, when you turn on the water and water comes out and it's actually safe to drink, that's not corporate America, right? That's actually because we fought against the privatization of water and other precious resources. Things that we take for granted is essentially because the government is doing its job, right? Like, and sadly, a lot of people somehow think business does it better. I live in the state of Illinois, right? Bruce Rauner was the former governor, right? Like, and business wanted to basically destroy it and wanted to bring Scott Walker to Illinois, right? Like, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe people actually buy that line that sort of business leaders can be good political leaders. they also don't know how to share power and compromise, right? Like that's, of course, the whole story of Donald Trump, right? Someone who thought that he could just come in and run things instead of actually in a democracy where you have to actually share power because, surprise, surprise, actually, we have different opinions on things, right? And so if you want an authoritarian leader, if you want a king, okay. But if you actually don't, then you actually need both a democracy, but you also need a functioning government with civil servants who actually sort of serve the people because that's their job, as opposed to companies whose job it is to serve their shareholders.
Yeah, see, there you go. There you go, talking that educated stuff. Yeah, that's we can't have that, Peter. Can't have that at all. What we need Donald Trump, he himself can do it alone. Because if you remember, he said he alone could fix everything, and yet the only thing that got fixed was our tax code to basically rob the treasury and hand off more to the wealthy.
Yeah, and in my home state, the great state of Florida, right, where Donald Trump lives just a few miles away from where I happen to sit next to my mom, there's this massive teacher shortage. Florida's supposedly so great, thanks to Governor DeSantis, but they can't even sort of put enough bodies in classrooms to teach our children, right? That's the story of the modern day Republican Party. It's really a story of collapse.
No, it's sad. Now, I do want to go back, Peter. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Peter Cole, history professor at the University, Western Illinois University. I want to go back for a second and talk about this piece of legislation that wants to undo the Fair Labor Standards Act, because I think this is a really important piece of legislation that most people have no idea what it does. I mean, it ended child labor. It put maximum hour laws. We got overtime out of this, a minimum wage. That kind of stuff. While we haven't increased minimum wage in 12, 13 years, 100 years at this point, it might as well be. You've got these people who want to do away with all of this stuff. And I think it's important to remember what it took to get to this place and what it was like before we had just these minor protections in place. And maybe from your perspective, what it would be once that goes away.
Well, the Fair Labor Standards Act is really one of the most important pieces of legislation passed during the New Deal, but honestly in the 20th century. The idea that millions of children worked outside of the home for wages wasn't because their parents were brutal, it's because their parents were poor, right? And so they often had no choice then to sort of send their children into the workplace where employers paid them pennies on the dollar and where employers often sort of put them at risk of injury and death, right? Children in mines, children in factories. It is really incredible to me how people who have children would imagine that would be an okay situation for them, for their children.
Well, not their children, Peter, somebody else's children.
Right, of course, there's always somebody else's children, right? One of the major flaws in the Fair Labor Standards Act, like you noted, sort of, is that there's no, it's not tied to inflation or even just sort of pegged to increase every 5 years, 10 years or so. And so, like you said, it's been since 2009, the first year of Obama's presidency, right, was the last time that minimum wage was raised. The idea that people are now working for $7.25, right, is sort of insane, right? But in numerous states, that's still the case. In Illinois, where I live, it's actually $12 an hour. And on January 1, thanks to really Democratic supermajority and the Democratic governor, it will rise to $13 on January 1st and $14 in 2024 and $15 in 2025. That's not enough, but it's literally twice as much, right, as people in many other states are getting. When people complain about inflation, it's like, let's just raise the minimum wage. I do want to give a shout out to organized labor, which I'm happy to criticize, even though I'm a proud member of the AFT. Organized labor really bankrolled the fight for 15, right? And that's an unusual example where unions have done something for the good of the many, as opposed to just for the good of their members. Too many unions are sort of narrowly focused on just their members. But in fact, unions and union members benefit also when everyone else makes more money, because instead of becoming an island where you're drowned in a sea of low-wage workers, you actually sink the ocean, right? So that workers aren't competing against each other because more workers are actually getting paid decently, right? And so that was a problem. It was a sort of a tragic flaw in the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so it requires an act of Congress to raise the minimum wage. And That's very rare, right? That you can get enough Congress people to sort of actually support what seems to be such a no-brainer. The only other thing I'd say about that is actually in a number of Republican states, there have been, when there are state referendums to raise the minimum wage, they actually do vote for that. And so this is an issue that I think would gain traction among a bipartisan votership, if not a bipartisan Congress, right? Because people in Arkansas, people in a number of states that are Republican strongholds actually vote for minimum wage hikes when it's on the ballot.
Yeah, I think your state of Florida there, they voted for a minimum wage increase in the last election, didn't they?
You know, honestly, I don't know that. Of course, they also voted to sort of give former felons their voting rights back, and then the Republicans immediately changed the rules in order to.
Of course they did. Of course they did, and why wouldn't they? So, last question I've got for you, because you're looking at in this moment in history where workers are looking for organizing opportunities. We just spoke with a young woman who's organizing with an Amazon United union and attempting to make their workplaces better. Do you have hope for the future of work in this country, especially given the fact that the moneyed interests are spending so much to push these other ideas like workplace flexibility, like the worker flexibilities agreements? Do you have any hope going forward? Thoughts?
Like if I didn't have hope, I'd just slit my wrist right now. And so I work with young people. I'll have 100 young people in my classes starting next Monday. Young people generally give me hope, right? And my young people aren't radical college students. I work at a very ordinary public university with most of my students are first generation college students. They really just want to get into the middle class, to be honest. But they're generally progressive. They generally are anti-racist, and they generally are pro-union, right? And so what I say, whether it's on climate change or for that matter, unions, if essentially their parents and grandparents don't destroy the planet before they get to control, I think we'll be okay. Although I do fear that, especially in Florida, where you said, the waters are rising fast. But I do have hope. And of course, as you know, most of the energy that's in this union campaign, whether it's Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, REI, et cetera, those are young people. Those are 20 and 30 somethings, right? And many of them are college educated, right? Because of limited job opportunities, right? But nevertheless, this union wave is being driven from below, but also by the millennials and Z, right? And we should be very happy about that, right?
No. I'm thrilled by it. I'm thrilled to see the energy. I'm thrilled to see the interest, and I think giving them a little bit of the history and a little bit of the background gives them even more information and more drive to make sure that they don't repeat the mistakes of the past and have to live through the horrible tragedies of past generations. At least my thoughts. But Peter, I appreciate you sharing your expertise, your thoughts and knowledge with us. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
I hope so too. Thanks, and have a good evening.
Thanks so much, Peter Cole. He is the professor of history there at Western Illinois University. He does some really fantastic stuff. We'll get some links out and you can check out the work that he does. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Again, if you missed any portion of the program, podcast from iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, everywhere in between. You'll find it. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day that 101 leaders of the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies, were convicted in Chicago federal court. Their alleged crime? Violating the Espionage Act during World War I by calling strikes in war industries and calling for an end to the draft. Those convicted included some of the leading names of the IWW. Big Bill Haywood, Ralph Chaplin, the author of Solidarity Forever, and Ben Fletcher, a black IWW organizer in Louisiana, were all all found guilty. More IWW leaders awaited trial in California and Kansas. Federal raids swept up wobbly leaders across the country. In all, more than 2,000 IWW members were arrested during the war. Kennesaw Mountain Landis presided as judge over the Chicago trial. In Chicago, the jury deliberated only a little more than an hour. They found every defendant guilty. Landis sentenced Big Bill Haywood and other top IWW leaders with 20 years in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. Ben Fletcher got 5 years. All of the men went to prison, except Haywood, who skipped bail and fled the country. The arrests and convictions were a devastating blow to the IWW. But the union did not completely disappear. New leaders emerged to carry on their mission of one big union. Their headquarters are still located in Chicago. President Calvin Coolidge commuted the sentences of those still in prison in 1923. As for Judge Landis, his action on being tough on so-called Reds earned him a national reputation. And so, in 1920, he became Major League Baseball's first commissioner, a post he would hold for more than 2 decades. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. This is one of those blast from the past kind of stories. Evidently, there was a civil suit. For people in Pennsylvania, they're going to remember the Cash for Kids scheme, the Kids for Cash scheme that went on. You had 2 judges up in the Scranton area who were basically sentencing kids to jail time in the for-profit juvenile detention center. They helped close down the county one. So that there could be built a for-profit one. And, kids who came before the court for minor stuff, like skipping school, petty theft, jaywalking, just smoking on school grounds, just minor infractions. They would basically lock up. And none of this, hey, you report in a couple of days. I mean, immediately shackle and handcuff and drag them off without letting them say goodbye to their families or any of this stuff. I mean, kids as young as 8 years old. Now you go, well, there's tough love. We gotta crack down. We're gonna show them early. Got to teach them early not to crime. Maybe something we should have told Donald Trump and his flock. But they were making huge amounts of money, huge kickbacks from this for-profit kiddie jail. And a couple years back, they finally got caught. It finally caught up to them, and you're talking about thousands of cases. In fact, when I was reading through the story, they went and said that the state had gone back and thrown out like 4,000 juvenile convictions of more than 2,300 kids. So we're talking huge amounts of money. Now, again, this is where privatization, again, why I'm so dead set against privatization. Handing anything off to corporate America, in my view, bad idea. Especially if it's those things that you should be doing yourself. Locking people up. Gee, it's kind of interesting how when we privatized the prisons, the number of people in them went up. Kind of interesting how that happens. Kind of interesting how when you sign contracts for profit prisons that say that they'll have 85% occupancy, that somehow we put the heads in beds. It's kind of interesting how that happens, isn't it? Quite remarkable. So they lost the civil suit. They're going to have to pay $106 million in compensatory damages and $100 million in punitive damages to nearly 300 people in this, what they've described as a very long-running civil suit. Now, are these 2 judges, who both of them in their 70s, are they going to pay? No. The one guy's still in prison. He'll be in prison until he's even older, until 2035. He's not getting out anytime soon. And the other one, he's 70. He's still got 6 years left on his sentence, but he's under house arrest. Got out a couple of years ago because of the pandemic. But it's the point that, these guys are going to have nothing ever, and nor should they. It's disgraceful. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any of today's program, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a moment. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com.